Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Lost His Memories and Got Teleported to Bleach movie. Before we start, please go support Dante 477 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. In a world where souls are said to rest in peace, a blonde boy falls into the earth with no memories of his life in the real world. Not knowing what he is, he embarks on an adventure to discover who he truly is and the reason for his constant struggle. Part 1 Untitled. Shinigami. How did I get to this point? Like I'm alive again, I don't understand it. Everything seemed easier when, ironically, I was living well dead. What does that mean? It sounds a bit hard to understand, doesn't it? At first, it was for me too, but over time, those little details didn't matter and you just live this life after death, as many call it. It all began when I arrived in this world of the dead for the first time. I was a special case straight out of a children's story because tragically, I didn't remember my life in the world of the living. No memories, nothing, just emptiness. So, for me, my second chance was my first. I arrived in the deepest part of the Ryokangai. I still remember it like it was yesterday. District 80 West, a pleasant and warm place at least if you ruled there and were ruthless with everyone. I remember that we Shinigami had the motto that the afterlife was a paradise for anyone who had suffered in the world of the living. That was the biggest lie that ever existed. I still remember a woman crying about returning to the human world because the world of the living could be a terrible place. The Ryokangai was more like hell than the paradise she'd been led to believe in. She committed suicide shortly after saying those words right in front of me. Getting back to the point, I woke up and saw the world for the first time when I was only 5 years old, or I had the body of a child, whatever. No parents, no siblings, no family, all I had was myself, and it wasn't exactly pleasant. My first problem was hunger, then it was finding a comfortable place to take shelter, and finally, figuring out where I was. That's how my great life as a dead man began. My luck couldn't have been worse, for I discovered too late that I had fallen into the most anarchic and brutal place of all, a place where the law of the strongest prevailed and where you had to kill to survive another day. I managed to be silent, to live in the shadows, hidden from everyone. As a child, I couldn't afford to be caught stealing food. I had to survive. Little by little, despite still being a child, I began to increase my speed to steal more efficiently and lose my pursuers if we were discovered. I got into fights with other children who tried to take what I had obtained. Even older men tried to take what was mine. I learned to defend myself, I learned that life was hard and that there was only one way to keep living. To be the strongest. I don't know exactly how long I was in the Ryokangai, but it must have been quite a while, because when I finally decided to leave the 80th ward, I came out looking like a 14-year-old boy. I started by robbing the easier wards where Shinigami were around, at least a few of them, but it was something compared to where I'd come from. Shinigami were my biggest challenge. If I could hide and escape from one Shinigami, a trained warrior, then I could escape from anyone. I tested myself by hiding from those Shinigami, and once I had proven myself better than them, I raised the stakes by going down to other districts closer to the center. For me, it was a game to see how far my skill could go. In turn, I was considered the worst nuisance to the Shinigami who had to search for me because of the robberies. I was their worst nightmare. Then, I made the biggest mistake of my life, a mistake I swore I'd never repeat, and I haven't since. I had a moment of arrogance. I thought I was ready for a higher level, that all Shinigami were like that, and that I could escape them just like I did with all the others who failed in my quest, so I decided to steal in Ward 1. I really didn't know a captain would be around. In fact, it wasn't just any captain, it was Captain General Yamamoto Jinrikisai. He had captured me with great ease. I remember him being intrigued by my ability to conceal my Ryatsu to such a degree, or my infiltration skills without any training. I don't remember much of what happened next, but for some reason I can't quite grasp, I ended up at the Shinigami Academy. I went through the protocol, which involves taking the entrance exam. It was relatively easy. There wasn't much competition. I managed to get into the best classes, achieving the highest possible score. The idea of being a Shinigami never appealed to me. The classes were boring, the homework was incredibly tedious, and the idea of following orders was simply awful. But the commander-in-chief was always watching my every move, so I couldn't even back down without the fear of death looming. I was between a rock and a hard place. Ironic. The good thing about all this was that being a Shinigami satisfied my need for more power. Perhaps I found history books and other things that required memorization quite boring, but I always went to the library to learn more about the Shinigami disciplines. The first one that caught my attention was home, agility. I already had a large amount of spiritual energy and a strong Ryatsu. My body was being trained daily to its limits, so all I needed was skill. Taking about 2 months, I managed to perform 200 consecutive shunpo, swift steps, before reaching my limit. My speed without using Shunpo was already incredible, so with Shunpo, my speed became completely unstoppable. Hakuto was another discipline I dedicated almost all my time to, as I used it constantly, even in my childhood. I was a complete master of it. Finally, there were two other disciplines to which he had given greater priority. Kido. This was undoubtedly his greatest challenge while at the academy. He spent hours and hours reading about each Heido, which was his main objective because of its offensive nature. In addition to learning the Bakudo that most caught his attention, of course he also learned those required by the academy, but they were too weak for him. He was hailed as a genius, a prodigy for achieving such advanced knowledge in less than 2 years. His insatiable thirst for knowledge and power perhaps pushed him to limits he himself didn't know existed, but everything has its decline, and this would be his. Most of his teachers had high expectations of him as a Shinigami, and when they bestowed upon him his Zanpakuto, Asauchi, they were met with a sense of urgency. The truth is I was also very excited, so excited that I remembered who I was, not my past, but everything I had lived through up to that moment, everything I had gone through as a dead man, that my path to power had led me to be something I didn't want to be. I hated myself for having fallen so low, that's why, at that very moment, I refused to be a Shinigami. I was never going to be like them. I remember it was a complete disappointment when they found out I had given up my Zanpakuto. My Zanjutsu was incredibly good. I could beat someone wielding a real weapon with a wooden sword. I had really taken not using my Zanpakuto seriously, and everyone noticed. That was the moment I returned to my own roots. I went to visit children who had ended up in the same circumstances I had been in, though they did remember their lives as human beings. I helped them search for relatives. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we didn't. I couldn't keep so many children, so using what I earned from various jobs within the institution, I managed to build an orphanage for them. I didn't have a single friend at the academy. Every time I looked at someone, all I saw was the arrogance of belonging to a group that claimed to do good or simply coming from a noble class. Nobles were their worst enemy. In short, I was a genius ostracized by everyone, not that I wanted to strike up a conversation with anyone. I managed to provide the orphanage with many things, everything they needed for a good life, like food every day, new clothes, and so on. But as the number of children grew, my money was no longer enough. My pursuit of power stopped, replaced by a focus on my own needs. I started doing odd jobs, helping anyone who needed a workout or something else. I earned some money and the approval of those people for my good intentions, but what I really wanted more than their respect was money. One day, a woman told me I was handsome, very, very handsome. I simply raised an eyebrow before thanking her for the compliment. Her comment piqued my curiosity. That same day, I looked at myself in the mirror, something I never really did, to examine myself. Before me, I saw a blonde, blue-eyed, slim, but not particularly muscular teenager. That led me to only one conclusion. The oldest job in the Sirte itself. He earned a lot of money, a large amount that was enough for his small orphanage to grow abruptly, managing to have more orphan children. Everything was going well until his time off ended. It was time to return to reality. Against all odds, I managed to finish the academy, even without being able to use my Zanpakuto. As the star student, I was chosen by every division to be on their team. For some, this was the greatest privilege of all. Being able to choose which division to be in was undoubtedly a very unique case. But despite everything, I was determined. If I was forced to become a Shinigami, I wouldn't be part of the Gate 13. I would forge my own path. Kneeling on one knee, I looked at the captain commander with all the resolve I possessed. I want to belong to the special forces, on Mitsukido. I could see all the incredulous expressions from the captains and lieutenants, but I was focused on just one. The captain generals. Old Yamamoto had even opened his eyes to look directly at me. I would recognize that look anywhere. He was angry. I had defied his orders, and as a rule, this wasn't a place where he had any power. His hands were tied. Are you sure about that decision, Uzumaki Naruto? That was my name, the only thing I could remember about myself. It was perhaps the last vestige and clue I had about my past. I turned my eyes slightly to see the expression of the captain of the 2nd Division, Yoruichi Shimin, a somewhat tanned woman with purple hair and golden eyes. She, too, had a slight surprise at my choice, for from now on, she would be my supreme general. I'm sure, Captain General, Smtachm. That was it, that was the only thing truly worth remembering from that day. On the other hand, I joined the Special Forces, a select group of certain individuals who make up what would be the Sirte's military force. What does this mean? It means that we were the only ones who actually had real missions compared to the Shinigami. The Special Forces agents were simply soldiers in the shadows. Their deaths would go unremembered. They were weapons of the Sirte, obligated to die for it, perishing in the darkness. Our duty was completely secret. Our personal lives outside of work could never interfere with our missions. To society, we didn't exist. When I left the academy, the vast majority of Rukonkai, if not everyone, thought I had given up being a Shinigami and gone back to live among them. This wasn't entirely wrong, because I really did go to live there. I spent all my free time at the orphanage, which from that moment on became my home. The children were perhaps my only reason for continuing to do something I didn't like. For their sake, I had to kill, and that lightened my burden. Seeing them smile and be happy, oblivious to everything around them, was simply relaxing. That innocence they displayed brought a glimmer of hope to the end of the journey. The people of Rukonkai who knew him, or those from the surrounding areas, would come to visit him, offering him food and other things. To everyone, he was a hero and a great person, someone who genuinely cared about them, unlike the Shinigami. At night, I was an assassin, the best the Serite and the Special Forces could have ever had. Perhaps my speed wasn't enough to match my leader and captain of the 2nd Division, but my brute strength and stamina allowed me to keep up with her and even match her sometimes. I always lost when I used something she had created herself, which she called Shunko. It had initially intrigued me, but I decided to abandon it. I was going to find my own path. I couldn't walk the same way she did. We're all different. I became friends with my captain. She was a really energetic and interesting person. We always shared a drink or two before going to work. She, however, for some strange reason, didn't trust me. In fact, I once asked her what it was, and her answer was that I had no qualms about killing. For me, it was as natural as laughing without hesitation, without even thinking about the consequences. I simply killed my target without giving them a chance to defend themselves. I was confused too. It really came so naturally to him. That was his response, which fell on deaf ears. That never stopped him from having a good time with his captain. It was truly a lot of fun. She was always making jokes about his ninja uniform, as if it suited him perfectly. He'd respond with a laugh. That was their routine. Being part of the Special Forces hadn't really been so bad. He was starting to get used to it and even begin to like it. But everything that's going well tends to change with an unexpected twist, and that's what happened to him one night. I still remember it like it was yesterday. Shinigami. We're all gathered here, he said, wearing his Special Forces ninja uniform, as was his entire squad, who nodded in agreement. Then disperse. With that, the group scattered, running through the houses in a single direction. He had a mission. Apparently, there were reports of Shinigami energy alongside hollows in a specific area of the Rukonkai. It was believed they had been attacked due to the sudden disappearance of the Shinigami's Ryatsu. On the other hand, it could also be an act of betrayal, since there hadn't been just one, but many, and only one remained, still holding sway in that same place. Naruto-sama, I found something, she heard from above her position. It was a rookie in the Special Forces, Soifrong, from the Feng family, a noble clan that had always served her captain's clan. She was a very pretty girl, easily embarrassed, and she admired her for having heard about her many great achievements at the academy, especially graduating in 2 years and choosing to join the Special Forces. Well done, Soi-chan. With that, he suddenly appeared beside her to see what it was. He opened his eyes when he saw that it was a Shinigami outfit. What does this mean? He asked himself, worried as he looked at it. On the other hand, Soifrong and his squad searched everywhere, trying to find more clues. After a while, everyone presented themselves before we found nothing. There are no signs of the hollow nor of the Shinigami. Having said this, the soldiers saw what their leader had in his hands. This is just one. I found the others. With that, he threw down 5 uniforms. But one is missing. He left things hanging, waiting for a response. Not having time to waste, he began issuing orders. Alright, we're withdrawing. We found enough clues to conduct an investigation. The hollow has disappeared and there's no trace of the Shinigami. Suddenly, the fabric of space tore around the squad, surprising everyone with something so unexpected. Jillian emerged from it. Everyone in the squad was completely terrified. Not only were these hollows not supposed to be there, but the impossibility of it all was simply too much. Naruto reacted quickly, using Kido. Sanketsui, blue fire rain. He shouted, launching a ball of blue fire from his palm that struck one of the Jillian, destroying its head in a massive explosion. From the resulting tears, more small hollows began to emerge, making the blonde boy growl. Quick. Formation. He yelled, causing everyone to nod and form a circle around him. Disappearing in a shunpo, he found himself face to face with a large miner and, with a direct punch, managed to fracture its mask. Using a second punch, he pierced and destroyed it. Leaping before the miner disappeared, he plummeted down with a kick, piercing one of the Jillian right through the mask, finishing it off. He hadn't expected, however, that one of them would start loading a zero against his squad, which was defending itself against small hollows. Quickly heading towards them, he also saw that not only one of the Jillian, but 3 more were aiming at his squad from the front. He managed to arrive long before they fired. Bakudo number 81. Dank, void division. With this, a massive barrier rose up in front of his squad, managing to stop the 3 zeros of those smaller creatures. The group, on the other hand, watched in amazement at their leader's display of skill. This proved costly, as they failed to notice more hollows behind them. Reacting in time, they managed to defend themselves against a surprise attack. Naruto then noticed that only the 3 smaller hollows remained. Using his ingenuity, he exploited his enemy's lack of balance. Back at number 63. Sajum Sabaku, wire wrapping chain. He shouted his incantation as 3 large golden chains rapidly flew towards the legs of the smaller hollow, who, trying to walk, couldn't overcome the chains and ended up falling forward, right in front of Naruto, who smiled. Rakem, roaring thunder cannon. He said, striking the hollow with an electric sphere that destroyed its head and half of its body in a massive electrical explosion. Seeing that he had more enemies behind him and still 2 more to go, he decided to end it all with one shot before anyone in his squad got hurt. Everyone. Run. The shout made his team react, causing the various agents to scatter in different directions, leaving the field open for their leader, who was beginning to gather a great amount of power in his hands. Hado no. 73, he whispered with his eyes closed before opening them forcefully and firing, Smren Smkatsui, Twin Lotus, Blue Fire Rain. He shouted his attack, firing a dual beam of blue fire with such devastating power that it completely eliminated all the small hollows and the lower half of the smaller ones. Naruto-sama did it, Soifrong congratulated, seeing that all the enemies had been defeated. His squad nodded in agreement, making their leader smile slightly. Even though we've won, we have to look for some sign or clue that can lead us to those responsible for the hollow's arrival, Naruto explained as the others nodded. This hasn't been normal at all. A hollow can cross over to the Rukonkai, but it happens rarely. But so many of them, and accompanied by Jillian. This is definitely not normal. We have to report this before it's too late. Before anyone could say anything. A huge chasm opened up beneath them, along with all the hollow's remains. The entire squad was shocked and plummeted into the void. Naruto watched as his squad effortlessly fell into Hueco Mundo. He could have saved his own life since he had jumped out before the rift opened, but then he saw Soifrong, the only one who hadn't completely vanished. Grabbing her unexpectedly, he managed to throw her out of the chasm before it could seal her, switching places with her in a matter of seconds after it opened, shouting his last words to her. Soi-chan. It all depends on you. Were the last words Soifrong heard after the rift closed, leaving her on the ground, staring almost lifelessly as her group disappeared and her closest friend sacrificed his life to save her. Shinigami. Why did he sacrifice his life for hers? He didn't know, but the vast majority of his acquaintances called him a hero, and if a hero had the opportunity to save at least one life, then it had been worth it. He never regretted making that decision. For him, this had been the best way to die. But life brings him more surprises, especially when suddenly, he and his group end up in a place so dark and without an apparent sky, with enormous structures made of quartz, resembling trees, also known as the Minos Forest. Chapter 2. Prologue 2. Hollow. I remember that fateful day very well, when my squad and I ended up in that place known as Bosque Minos. The place was utterly dreadful, the pressure was undeniably chilling, and above all, anything but welcoming. My group and I were completely cut off from the world. No one had ever ventured into Hueco Mundo, much less knew what it was like. On one hand, I felt curious, and on the other, I felt the anxiety of being trapped with no way back. 1 week. It was only 1 week that I managed to keep my squad alive. That small group on whom I had grown accustomed to depending my life, and I theirs, they trusted me. I failed them. During the following days, we fought relentlessly, battle after battle, a constant struggle that slowly wore them down, until finally they surrendered completely to despair and their lives with it. They trusted me. I was their last hope, with empty promises that we would return to our world. No matter how many times I said it, it was a hollow promise that even I tried to believe. The first day I asked for 3 companions, the next day 2, the day after that 4, and so it went until the 7th day only 1 remained. He was badly injured, missing an arm and a leg. He was nothing but a burden to me, yet I tried to help him, repeating that false mantra that we would return, over and over, terrified of finally being left alone. I walked for miles searching for a way out of this horrendous place, but not a single glimmer of light answered me. No matter how hard I tried to help, I didn't know a way to heal him. Even so, he was at a point where healing wouldn't work anymore. He was dying. He still remembers that, in a cave they found, they were ambushed by hollows. In that ambush, he had to leave his companion in order to live. He managed to defeat each wave of hollows that came after him, but somehow, it was not enough to prevent his companion from being devoured, thus losing his last companion. I was alone in a world I didn't know. The pain in my body wasn't enough to compare with the pain in my soul, an incessant ache. Madness overwhelmed me, only leading to more despair. I descended into complete insanity, stained with the blood of my comrades. I walked like a living dead man, searching for the reason I was still alive. Yet, something motivated me to continue, to be in this constant fight, and that was the thirst for blood. Somehow, this place reminded me of my life before becoming a Shinigami. The law of the strongest prevailed here, just as it did in my old home. Somehow, the forest became my home, a place where I could satisfy my need for constant struggle and self-testing. Unwittingly, the cure for my madness became more of a burden than a solution. The savagery I lived with made me forget what truly mattered, changing my perspective from a peaceful life to the constant feeling of danger at every moment. I don't know how many hollows I destroyed. I lost count after all the waves. I couldn't sleep. Danger lurked around every corner. Perhaps the worst thing I could have done was go hungry. There were so many options, but all I saw was the flesh of my dead enemies. Out of necessity, I devoured the flesh of my enemies, further increasing my descent into madness. I didn't care if this was forbidden or simply a taboo subject. I had to live. He also doesn't know how long he was lost, always trying to find his way out of this terrible place. On his journey, he managed to find a nest of Uchihas, who seemed to be the ones in charge of that dreadful place. How did he find it? It was easy. Among the hollows he killed, he found a couple whose reason was intact. It was very rare to find this type of hollow, especially in the Minos forest. They usually stayed in the human world. The Minos are a race of hollows with such an insatiable appetite that they become desperate to fill the void in their hearts. So great is their need that they become cannibals, devouring their own kind. Hollows who possess reason, on the other hand, are ancient, highly corrupted souls with a great deal of evil in their hearts, or perhaps an immense amount of strength. He managed to infiltrate the Uchiha nest, but still had to fight his way out. Destroying each of his enemies, he finally escaped that dungeon, only to fall into a new one, the Hueco Desert. His hopes died upon encountering this new obstacle. All the savagery of before was petrified when he saw what lay before him, utter nothingness. He wandered through the desert without any apparent direction, unaware of the future that awaited him or the fate he was destined to face, with no apparent signs of life. He encountered the worst punishment a person could receive. Solitude. He had always thought that leaving the forest was his main objective, his strongest ambition, his greatest dream. But what was the point of it all? Why had he embarked on an adventure only to reach such a conclusion? He didn't know, and he questioned himself on that very question countless times. In the end, perhaps that is the conclusion of all dreams and goals. A profound disappointment. That rush of adrenaline had vanished, all feelings were eradicated, my entire self was eradicated the further I walked through that disastrous place. I lost my voice, I lost my mind, I was completely lost in that labyrinth without walls and without end. More than once I wished I were back in the forest, where at least I had a goal to fight for, but now nothing made sense anymore. I had avenged my comrades and fulfilled the objective for which they had all died to see something more than the forest. I don't know how far I walked. My feet were even bleeding, leaving footprints on the ground, a rather ironic thought, considering we are souls and don't have physical bodies. Why do we bleed? These questions surfaced as I tried to keep my thoughts away from my grim reality. Everything has a beginning and an end. My search began with a goal and ended as an ordeal of loneliness. These were my last thoughts as I collapsed, exhausted, onto the white sand. Closing my eyes, I longed for my soul's release from this hell. I wanted to rest, far from everything that surrounded me. I wanted to die. Life had other plans for me, because when I opened my eyes, I only found myself staring at a mask that resembled a ram, or perhaps a horse. He quickly composed himself, almost lazily, shaking his head, trying to remember what had happened. He turned his questioning gaze back to what was in front of him, for it was none other than a hollow. Judging by its power level, it was an Uchiha's. To him, it was simply strange. He had never before encountered a hollow that lacked a killer instinct. It was almost harmless. On the other hand, he couldn't let his guard down so easily. Seeing it fully, he realized that its upper half was that of a human, made of bones, while its lower half was that of a skeletal horse, or perhaps wrapped in the same whitish material as its mask. He then watched as the hollow retreated once he had fully awakened, leaving him alone at a safe distance. "What are you?" was what I heard coming from his mask. He seemed to distrust me too, and it was no wonder. However, he was a little curious to see that a hollow had not been able to recognize his most lethal enemy. "You could say I'm a Shinigami." My voice sounded hoarse, I almost didn't recognize it. Had I perhaps forgotten my own voice? Little did I know, it wasn't the biggest surprise in store. I remember that alarmed expression on the hollow's face very well. It seemed to have finally grasped the danger, but for some strange reason, that didn't stop it from running away or trying to kill me. Rather, it showed curiosity. "Why don't you try to kill me?" "That's a Shinigami's job," was the question I heard back then. I wondered the same thing. Why? I didn't know the answer, and I knew I would never fully understand. "You don't seem like a bad guy," I replied, admiring the silence of the one who would become my enemy. It was like a sixth sense I'd always had, as if somehow I knew who was my enemy and who wasn't. Perhaps it was instinct or the experience of all those years of being frequently attacked. So much time had passed between battles that I could distinguish the sensation of killing. "Even so, you're a Shinigami, you're supposed to kill hollows," said the Ajuchas as he looked at the desert a few meters away, which he finally recognized as a cave. "I suppose so," I admitted lazily, "but I never called myself a Shinigami. I never really liked following orders." That was true, even up to this moment. I hate with all my might following orders, especially when they come from older people like the Captain General or the Order of 46. "I see," said the Ajuchas as he lay down as best he could in the cave. A long silence passed as they both tried to rest as little as possible without letting their guard down. "Hey," he called to me. I responded, looking at that strange being with doubt. "What is heaven like in the human world?" he asked, ignoring my growing discomfort. "Well, it's blue, it's clear, it has little pillows flying around there like water balloons or something," I remembered, closing my eyes. So much time had passed that the sky itself was like a blurry image. There's a small sphere that's visible to the naked eye, but it's actually huge and provides light as well as heat. The Ajuchas listened to my entire story with great attention. It seemed that he was really interested. "I understand, I'd like to see it someday," he finished, looking at the ceiling of the place, which was just an exact image of the sky above them, a terrible emptiness and darkness. "Me too," I longed, it was almost a plea from me, how I yearned to feel the light on my skin again, the warmth of the sun itself, or to feel the warmth of someone else against my cold, lifeless skin. Perhaps I couldn't see my face or certain parts of my body, but my skin had changed completely from how I remembered it. From the lack of light, it had turned white and milky, a considerable change, since it had been somewhat tanned. "For a Shinigami you're very strange," said the Ajuchas, also ignoring that he had laughed, which surprised me a lot at first. I had never heard that a hollow could laugh. "Look who's talking, Ajuchas," I replied without wanting to look at him. I found it really hard to believe that, for a minute, I was having a conversation with a hollow. Maybe they weren't so bad after all. Weren't they those mindless creatures that the Soul Society made us believe they were? That last part makes a lot of sense. It wouldn't be the first time the Soul Society made us believe something that was completely wrong. Despite our growing animosity, we had a stroke of luck encountering many more hollows who weren't malicious. Our small group began to swell as we traveled, and that progress began to change me as well. I stopped seeing hollows as wild animals. Soon, they became like normal people in my eyes, even companions. The Ajuchas I met that day was, with all due respect, my best friend, even better than any Shinigami I'd ever encountered. That hollow wasn't just someone I could share stories with. He was someone I could share my problems, my doubts, my denial, even my sanity. I too began to learn more about that Ajuchas. He was a charitable soul who loved to joke and laugh. He even hated the very idea of being alone. I even saw him cry in front of those friends we lost along our journey. I realized then how completely wrong I was to compare myself to that hollow, or perhaps I was more of a hollow than he was. Filling without mercy, without control, with a frenzied fury, without fear of breaking moral rules in the process, caring about nothing and no one at all except my own life. I realized that we Shinigami were less angelic than we believed. We were just that people, and as such, we are not perfect. We can make mistakes, we can fail, we can, like an angel, fall into darkness. Well, there are hollows that could simply be more human than we were. If a Shinigami can fall into darkness, a hollow can also cry. During my journey through philosophical moments, I had to set philosophy aside to delve into something more important, a great discovery. For some reason, those small treetops composed of quartz, due to the constant exposure of my Ryatsu, were able to slightly absorb those properties and bear fruit. Completely confused by this new phenomenon, despite the constant disapproval of my companions, I took a bite, filling myself with that flavor very similar to a fruit from the human world that was the beginning of the sedentary hollows. Upon this discovery, we spent perhaps thousands of hours experimenting randomly with every tree we found, and each one yielded a different fruit. I don't know for sure how many we tried, but it must have been a vast quantity, enough to fill a cave with food, each one different from the rest. I spent hours upon hours writing on a wall of that cave, describing every fruit I could recognize and explaining what it was, an enormous mural of information, perhaps even the first tablet of knowledge in Hueco Mundo. Far away, in the vastness of the hollow desert, we found a huge empty mountain, a mountain that soon became our home. Thanks to the help of my fellow hollows, we were able to safely excavate the mountain, making it completely hollow, enough to build a city from the remaining materials. Outside the mountains, we experimented with what would soon be called agriculture. At first, the idea was a complete joke on my part, almost a crazy notion that my companions couldn't believe. After giving them a beating, I managed to teach them what I had learned from the world of the living and a little from the Sirete. Those fruits soon ceased to be just a couple. They became dozens and dozens of foods. What was special about these fruits and vegetables was the large reservoir of spiritual energy they provided. Most hollows had to eat humans to maintain their sanity, because if they didn't eat plus or other hollows, they would fall back into chaos and carnivorous despair. The food alleviated their insatiable hunger and, in a way, lightened their souls, even granting them a better grasp of reason. I then realized that my spiritual energy, which came from a Shinigami, was due to the exposure to those fruits, something they found delicious for some reason. This new food alternative spread like wildfire among all the hollows in our small, hidden town. A new life began for them all, one that no longer needed to be as bloody as before. The hollows, then, ceased to be animals and became more human. This not only made me feel a little old, because if I remembered correctly, it was the same evolutionary change that would have lasted thousands of years in the human case. On the other hand, this was my friend's dream, who woke up every day in what seemed to be the best mood I had ever seen in a spiritual being. Uchiha, who was the strongest among all those in the city, soon became the complete leader of this small town. I remained in the shadows, like the black sheep I was, because although the vast majority felt comfortable around me, being a Shinigami was met with great distrust among the newcomers or those who had had very bad experiences with them. However, I was a Shinigami, I didn't belong to this world. As time passed, a strange illness progressed through my body. I tried to hide it as best I could, but the symptoms were quite obvious. This caused concern among everyone, as my condition went from bad to complete agony. I lay prostrate on the ground, like a man whose time had run out. Perhaps my stay in this world had been too long. Perhaps I didn't truly belong here. I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I was going to die. Even in my dying moments, I continued to help as best I could, offering as much information and advice as possible. I wanted to see how much this little world I had created would progress. I wanted to know and watch it grow, it pained me deeply to have to leave it. My friend never left my side from the first day of my decline, always beside me, always waiting for me to get up and start teasing him like we always used to. I could never do it again. My hair had grown incredibly long, almost reaching my back, with strands covering my eyes. The bright golden blonde hair was gone, replaced by a pale yellow, a shadow of its former glory. My blue eyes were gone, replaced by a deep reddish hue, the same color as the spilled blood of my former Shinigami comrades. One day, I could hear my friend's laments, please to who knows who a god. Do hollows have a god? So many questions, so many mysteries I wanted answers to. I simply wanted to keep living, finding any excuse to prolong my stay in this world. What are you doing? I asked with great effort as I listened to her pleas to her god. I was very curious, a curiosity I couldn't suppress. Even on my deathbed, my quest for knowledge would never end. I'm asking for your recovery, isn't that what humans do? I remember that when one of them was on the verge of despair, they always pleaded for a being above them in the sky, he finished while remaining silent. I could see his hands together, praying to who knows the Spirit King. That would be very funny and highly ironic. I couldn't help but laugh at his words, ending with a horrible cough that startled my companion. You don't know what you're doing. Really, are you worried about me? You're very strange, very, very strange. A hollow desperate to find my salvation. If someone had told me this a long time ago, I never would have believed it, I finished, with what little strength I had left. My voice grew weaker and weaker, and sleep overtook me. Save your strength, I promised to find a cure, I know I will, he falsely promised with a determination that surpassed even that of any Shinigami I had ever seen. Closing my eyes, I heard tears falling to the ground. I wasn't mistaken. His companion was crying. I couldn't help but let out a weary laugh at the sight of Hollow crying. Finally, I thought I had seen it all. I think I could finally leave in peace, for my thoughts, in the end, hadn't been wrong after all. There never was a completely good side and there never will be a completely bad one, it's just our way of believing we're doing the right thing, a perspective of someone weak-hearted who doesn't see the world as it is, a balanced gray area. I closed my eyes, expecting a warrior's fate, with nothing but the cold embrace of death and the endless void. I was shocked when all I found was an immeasurable amount of pain. A pain that made me rise from where I lay and scream with all my might. From my mouth and eyes, a white substance spread across my face, seeking to control everything around it. I felt fear for the first time, a fear I never thought I would experience. I was becoming a hollow. But despite the immense pain, another feeling arose, one I had felt before. The need to kill, a murderous instinct that compelled me to kill anyone I encountered. It was a feeling I had mastered long ago, back when I was little more than a brat. Taking a deep breath, I managed to calm my emotions, clearing all negativity from my being. The mask ceased its attempt to consume me, and finally, I saw the fragile balance we all shared. I watched in surprise as tiny corrupted bluish particles, a corrupted energy similar to blood itself, formed a completely amorphous and contaminated Reishi. I saw exactly how that Reishi desperately tried to enter my body, but my soul utterly refused its entry, as if it were a virus, and would self-destruct. Concentrating completely, he began to calm his soul, trying to quell all the madness of that Reishi and, at the same time, attempting to find balance within himself. He lost all contact with the outside world. Only he and the Reishi surrounding him existed. It was a state almost like being dead, mimicking the earth, an apparently lifeless being, imitating the state of an inanimate thing like air or rocks. His soul had finally accepted that energy, merging it with his own being, changing his soul without the need for its destruction. It was an arduous task that took who knows how long, but he finally managed to change his being. Coming to his senses, he looked with some curiosity at the completely dark space where he found himself, supported only by what appeared to be a platform made of Reishi. Rising to his feet, he realized the vast difference between his states. He was no longer a Shinigami, but neither was he a hollow. What were they then? He touched his face with great curiosity and noticed something covering it, similar to bone. Slowly taking hold of the mask, he noticed a slight change each time he moved away from it. His hair began to disperse as the sensation on his back vanished. Without knowing exactly why, he also saw that the portal closed every time the mask moved away from him, so he decided not to take it off. For the first time in his life he saw a light at the end of his tunnel, a light that perhaps led to an even worse place, a light that, while reminding him of his disappointment, also managed to give him something he had long since lost hope. He began by taking his first calm steps, the walk turned into a trot, and that trot became a desperate dash to discover what lay on the other side of the threshold. He didn't care what awaited him, even with the sorrow in his heart for having left his entire adventure behind, but if one thing he was certain of, it was that it no longer mattered what happened to him. His entire life as a Shinigami, as a wanderer, had taught him an important lesson. Life is an adventure which is not designed for looking back. If life has taught me anything, it's that it's an adventure where you have to keep walking always towards the future. Hollow. As I said, from here on out, I'm not sure where to take it, whether towards the Gate 13 or a normal life as a human. On the other hand, it doesn't make much difference since both paths will end the same way. Well, I would appreciate your help with this. I think I've already made a decision, and it's the one that will be easiest for me to write. Many thanks to the few people who contribute to this fic. It's greatly appreciated. Also, I want to quickly answer a question. Naruto's Zanpakuto is indeed heavily linked to the Kyuubi. In fact, all of its Shikai abilities are based on all the Biju. Leave that to me. Its Bankai, on the other hand, is a combination of ideas I had just yesterday, so I at least have some idea of what it will be about, including a possible post-transformation state. As you can see, this state between an inanimate state is very similar to Sage Mode. In fact, it's exactly the same, except that, since the being using it is dead, it doesn't absorb natural energy, at least not in a world where everything is technically dead, but rather functions in the same way as the Quincy, absorbing Reishi molecules from its surroundings. I call it in Sage Mode. It's a theory I've always wanted to apply. Chapter 3. Prologue 3. Wandering. When I opened my eyes, all I saw was a blinding light. It was the first time I'd ever seen natural light other than the blast of a hollow or the sound of something exploding. I slowly regained consciousness and realized it was an open window. I got up as quickly as I could and found myself in what appeared to be a small resting place. Looking around, I recognized some things that looked like instruments from the human world and some things that I could even guess belonged to the 4th Division. I opened my eyes in shock when I realized where I was. The 4th Division barracks, therefore, I was in the Sirte. I was home. Unable to contain my own feelings of joy and excitement, I quickly jumped out of bed and went to the window, confirming that it was indeed the same place that had once been my home. I couldn't help but shed a few tears, realizing that my efforts had finally paid off and that was coming home. But then the memory of his fellow hollows came flooding back, a feeling of unease and sorrow he rarely had time to analyze or even acknowledge. He was truly overwhelmed by this grief for his friends, who were perhaps the best he could have ever had. This led him to other, very different thoughts. Why did he want to return? Why was he so fixated on going back to a place he didn't even like in the first place? He liked the place itself, sure, but not its inhabitants. He hated the Soul Society, he hated everything it meant to be a Shinigami, and he didn't like the idea of following orders. Why did he leave a place where he truly felt at ease? He remembered then that it had been more than just an accident. Had he not been undergoing hullification, he would never have returned. But these new thoughts, I jumped out the window, unaware that I was only wearing my military agency pants. The action surprised everyone as they saw someone leap out of the building and crash to the ground, shattering it in the process. Without a single injury but dust, I started running away, ignoring the surprised looks from the Shinigami of the 4th Division. A few tried to stop me, but my speed was practically superior to theirs, and soon I was gone. Using Shunpo, I managed to reach the place where it all began in less than a minute, the place I probably wanted to see again, the old orphanage. I looked with a touch of nostalgia at that grand orphanage I had built with my own hands so long ago. I wandered through each room, and I could then recall the shadows of each child crossing, running, and playing, old vestiges of my memory that I was trying to anchor to reality. On the other hand, I also realized that this place was completely abandoned. How many years have I been gone? It makes sense that he no longer shelters anyone, because without the money he provided, this place soon became uninhabitable, forcing the children to find new ways to feed themselves. I then sensed several sparks of Ryatsu, all approaching him with great speed. I recognized some, while others were new. He continued examining the place, reaching his room, his former haven of peaceful sleep, which was now nothing more than a dusty cobweb-covered mess. He raised an eyebrow when he found countless notebooks on the floor, each bearing a name he would recognize anywhere, the names of the children he had brought here. He also noticed others that appeared more recent, names he didn't recognize, but apparently, they had lived on after he disappeared. Leaving the place, he returned to the main room where the children used to play, now completely deserted. Something caught his attention. A toy on the floor. He picked it up and examined it with surprise, as it seemed to have been there for only a few days or even hours. By then, he had left his own world to face those who had come after him. Turning his gaze slightly, he saw all the captains of the Gate 13. He let out a small laugh as he looked with great irony at how he now seemed more like a traitor than someone who had been saved moments before. What a surprise to see all the captains just to see me, I said with a hint of sarcasm in my voice. I can't help but be surprised when I still see familiar faces among them all. His gaze shifted to some of the captains. How many years have passed for there to be so many new faces in the Gate 13? His genuine confusion brought a sense of calm to everyone, as he seemed not to want to attack anyone. It's been almost 100 years since you disappeared. I could only squint. I remember spending a great deal of time lost in the forest. My sanity may have vanished, but I wasn't that stupid. Maybe time passes differently there. Or perhaps that strange opening that brought them to Hueco Mundo transported them slightly back in time. It was a theory I had to test someday. I see you're a couple short, I remarked, noticing there were only 11 captains, with old Yamamoto and one other captain missing. It was simply interesting to see how everyone's faces tried to reflect neutrality. They seemed to be in trouble right now. Uzumaki-kun, he heard the Tsukuki say. He was perhaps the one he got along with best, even in the past. We don't know how you came back, but thanks to Captain Soifrong, the only thing we knew about you was that you disappeared with your squad in a dimensional tier. Could you tell us where you ended up? He asked for everyone, seeming to be the most qualified to speak. I remained completely silent, not knowing what to answer, because although they seemed friendly, my status as a Shinigami with hollow powers was not something they could understand. I had to appear as an ally. I might be strong, but I knew who to take on in a fight, and he couldn't fight against the entire Sirte. I fell with my group in Hueco Mundo. Everyone's eyes widened at this news. Hueco Mundo was just a myth, a story among them all, because although the vast majority had a lot of information about hollows, no one had ventured to their place of origin, much less escaped from there. I don't want to talk about it. Having said this, the captains only frowned at my choice of words, because I think they were used to being answered. Uzumaki, answer the questions. He merely raised an eyebrow at the voice, for although he had already been named by Yukitake, it was very ironic to hear those words from someone who had saved his life a long time ago. Soi-chan, I see you've become a captain. The woman blushed violently at her old and embarrassing nickname. But suddenly, in the blink of an eye, he was behind her, his back bumping against hers. You're still the same rookie you were back then. All the captains opened their eyes when they realized that what they saw in front of them was nothing more than an image produced by the enormous speed at which I traveled. His old friend reacted quickly, trying to turn around, but he returned to his previous spot before she could even see him. Faced with the incredulous stares of most of them, he could only laugh. He knew it was wrong to make fun of the new kids, but it was just so funny. You know, I've spent all this time fighting endlessly in a never-ending battle against hollows, countless of them, very strong opponents. Do you really think I've been having an easy life for 100 years? Come on, I know you can do better. I urged with my hands for someone to try their luck. I saw the faces of some who seemed angry at my choice of words and were drawing their weapons. Uzumaki-kun, we haven't come here to fight you. We just want you to return to receive medical treatment. You're still not well. I just stared sharply at the last face I truly knew, the captain of the 4th Division, and perhaps the person I had the most respect for in the Sirte, Yuichiro Nohana. Could you follow me if it's not too much trouble? She said with her usual pleasant and chilling smile. I wasn't afraid, I'd faced worse things, but it's not like I could say no to her, it would be a great lack of respect on her part. Of course, Anohana Taicho. With my response, the woman nodded as she withdrew, followed by her incredulous lieutenant and, of course, me. The other captains were equally incredulous because although at one point I was almost unleashing a great deal of thirst for battle, I was suddenly calmed down by the captain who now seemed very docile. Wondering. It wasn't long before they gave me some physical checkups and a psychological exam, and I was actually fine. With that said, they discharged me, and much to my dismay, I received Shinigami clothes, which, while I looked amazing, I didn't like at all. Finally, I could see myself in a mirror after all this time. Nothing had changed except for one thing: I wasn't a teenager anymore. Standing before the mirror, I was now a man, one who was incredibly attractive and muscular. The many battles I'd fought seemed to have served me well in my training. My hair had returned to its former lustrous gold, and my eyes were as blue as the sky. I sighed at what was coming, because while it wasn't ideal, I knew that sooner or later a conversation with old Yamamoto would have to happen. As expected, all the other captains and their respective lieutenants were there too, though I was still surprised that there wasn't one among them. Had something happened? "Uzumaki Naruto," I heard old Yamamoto say. "After your years of service, which were very short before the tragedy befell your squad, the Central 46 has decided to reinstate you to our forces. We welcome you to the Gate 13. I just raised an eyebrow. It seemed that, after all, old Yamamoto had finally gotten what he wanted. For me to join his noble cause. Thanks to Captain Soifrong's testimony at the time, we were certain it was you. However, to prove your loyalty to the Sirte, you must provide us with information about the place our enemies come from, known as Hueco Mundo." I just let out a half smile. So this was what he wanted. I don't remember it very well. It was a giant desert, with nothing in it except quartz trees, also infested with hollows that would suddenly appear. Old Yamamoto opened his eyes, having failed to get the information he wanted. I knew what he wanted to hear, but that wasn't my intention after all. "I'm sorry, Captain General, but my memory is somewhat hazy. I only remember the countless battles I fought inside," he said with a small smile. I saw the old man's hands grip his staff tightly. He was angry. "Captain General, I'm sorry to interrupt." He raised an eyebrow as the captain of the 4th Division interrupted the conversation, drawing everyone's attention. "Uzumaki-san's condition is, if not entirely, true. According to the analysis, he may be suffering from post-traumatic amnesia due to the countless battles and the deaths of his comrades. While he may have vague memories, it's unlikely he'll be completely sane when he remembers everything." I could only manage a smile, as I had won the best argument for keeping all the information I wanted about Hueco Mundo to myself. "Then I have no choice but to believe your words, Uzumaki Naruto." I simply lowered my head to hide my smile. I had won another battle against the old man, and he knew it. "But likewise, you must choose the division where you intend to serve from now on, until further notice. I hope you choose the best option to protect the Sirte." With that, he adjourned the meeting. I left with a bitter taste in my mouth. Although I had won against the old man, I still had to choose which division I would be assigned to, without the chance to return to my old position in the special forces. I left quickly, reaching the highest point in the Sirte in a matter of seconds. I knew I was being followed and was just waiting for the person to arrive. Finally, she saw her former mission partner. "Soi-chan, it's been so long, you've really grown up," she laughed, opening her arms and approaching her. She hadn't expected such an emotional outburst from her. She could feel her tears against her chest, and the sun seemed to embrace her. She had always been very sentimental, hiding it all behind a mask of confidence. "It's okay, we're okay." "But I why you," she tried to say, tears welling in her eyes. She knew she was completely distraught. Perhaps what had happened that day was the worst trauma she could have ever experienced. It was her first official mission. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It was just a simple mission to find clues. "Listen, Soi-chan, you did well, you really did well, you lived your life just like I told you to, you became a captain, I'm so proud of you," I remember saying to her while smiling. The woman wiped away her tears, returning a smile. "But come on, I expected a bit more speed from you." The woman's expression changed from happy to angry. "I don't want to hear that from you, lazybones." She growled angrily at my constant laughter. "I'm not like you, Kairoi Senko," I replied with an even more cheerful laugh. That was my nickname among the ranks of the entire Sirte, known for my incredible speed and mastery of Shunpo. That was a long time ago, I barely even remember it. I let out a sigh, a smile playing on my lips as I savored the view before me. "So what's happened while I've been gone? I know the captains change every couple of decades, but I'd still like to know what became of my supreme commander." His friend's expression frowned as she looked at her hands. Naruto understood. It was a very delicate subject. He preferred to change the subject. "Hey, how did you become a captain? Do you already know about Bankai?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. While the true form of his Zanpakuto's Shikai was its true form, the Bankai was the next level, which very few people could access. All of them anchored their names in history, a true achievement that took them to the summits, a trait among all captains. Yes. I told you so. Someday I'll catch up to him and surpass him. She said determinedly while showing her Zanpakuto. I could only manage a smile. It was so funny to see her like a child, but it was even more funny to see her act like one. That reminds me, have you used your Zanpakuto during your battles in Hueco Mundo? Her question was totally valid and also somewhat difficult to answer. It's still sheathed since the day they gave it to me. I don't even know how to use my Shikai, I admitted with shame, because although my vote was completely absolute, it would have been easier to destroy the hollows with a weapon. Naruto-senpai, you're a big fool. I just smiled sheepishly. Maybe so, but what would be the point of all the battles then? In the end, it was very useful because now I was incredibly strong. Why am I your senpai? You're a captain now, you should call me by my name. I saw her face scrunch up. She didn't seem to have changed at all. Then I saw her shake her head. The idea of her calling me by my name hadn't worked for a long time, and it wouldn't work now. Sighing, I just focused on enjoying the scenery, which would soon become the place I would protect even if I didn't want to. Wondering. I spent hours and hours trying to find a solution to my problem, but it always ended up intertwined with the Captain General. The last thing I wanted was to be under his commander unwillingly do his bidding. On the other hand, I was also tired of battles and would prefer a job where I had plenty of free time or didn't have to do much. And yet, I also wanted something to keep me busy. Uzumaki-san, could you help me with this? He heard a stutter beside him. Opening one eye, he saw it was the boy he'd found a few days ago cleaning his old hospital room. His name was Hinata, and he was currently talking to him. Without answering, he lifted a large wardrobe with one hand, helping the frail Shinigami clean the area. He felt genuine pity for the little guy, because even though he belonged to the most forgotten, essential, and discriminated against division of all, he was completely weak and couldn't defend himself. He was practically the butt of everyone's jokes. And to top it all off, his birthday fell on April Fool's Day, truly a very unlucky kid. On the other hand, he became the one he got along with best among them all, firstly because he was the only one so afraid of him that he didn't run away in fear like the others. Although he fainted at first, he soon grew accustomed to his presence. In fact, that last thing made him reconsider his options. Hey Hana, he called the little guy's attention. Remind me what your squad does. He asked curiously to the latter, who had a somewhat silly expression at the question. He was still getting used to it. Well, we take care of medical assistance for the wounded in battles, also assistance in remote places, giving first aid and all that, the small fellow explained while cleaning. We also take care of the supplies and cleaning of the Sirte. He said the last part very quietly, as if he had trouble with it. But generally it's a great place for people like me who don't know how to fight, he finished with a small smile, continuing with his work. I, on the other hand, had the phrase no fighting stuck in my head. Although it seems like an almost slave-like and completely useless group in the series, maybe that's where I could find the answers I was looking for and annoy old Yamamoto in the process. Why are you asking, Uzumaki-san? The little one asked, then turned to look at my face, which surely had a disturbing smile, because I scared his companion in the process. Oh, it's nothing, I just think I've found my division. Hinata began laughing slowly before blinking many times. I think he couldn't believe it. If he didn't believe it, I was waiting to see the old man's reaction. He still remembers how epic that was. Wondering. I remember this wasn't too long ago, as this was the last relevant thing that actually happened during all this time. I was in a room with Captain Anohana and you. I was completely calm, the captain was smiling, and her lieutenant was very nervous. How could she not be, when practically everyone was afraid of me? Maybe because of my skin. Sure, it was white, but Captain Mayuri is practically the same color as the sand of Hueco Mundo, but they're afraid of him too. It doesn't matter. So Uzumaki-san, what can I do for you? I hope it's not just to have tea with me. I could only manage a dry laugh, just like her lieutenant. It was a joke on her part, and if we didn't laugh, we'd be in trouble. Then I remembered my strategy very well. I did something I'll probably never do again. I lowered my head and knelt before her. Please, Anohana Taicho. I want to be part of your division. I exclaimed, leaving the lieutenant completely incredulous, but it didn't seem to have worked on the captain. I see, but first let me ask you why. I just sweated slightly at his question. Why? It was the same question I asked myself every time I woke up, the same doubt that arose when I saw something I didn't understand. The sword can serve to protect your comrades and kill enemies, I said as I drew my Zanpakuto, showing it to both of them, but it's not useful for saving those who truly matter. With that, I released it, making it clear that what I sought wasn't power, but a way to save lives. I raised my face and looked at them with all the determination I possessed. I want to learn how to save lives and alleviate pain. I won't achieve that by killing. With that, I saw the captain take a sip of tea and stare intently at me. That's a very interesting reason coming from you. Did losing your team affect you that much? I didn't remember you being like that, Uzumaki-san. I only remember frowning at his words, which, well they stung, were entirely true. Well, I have nothing against you, and to add to that, my motto is to welcome all enthusiasts with open arms. I just started smiling little by little at what this meant. Uzumaki-san, welcome to the card division. Unable to contain my happiness, I raised my arms, about to shout his victory, but I was abruptly stopped. Wait a moment, I'm not finished yet. Well, you're already in, there will be special rules for you. My happiness was destroyed in seconds, and I sat nervously listening to his demands. First, your training within the barracks will be purely healing Kido. If you wish to practice combat, it must be outside our barracks or the Sarate. He nodded. That was easy. Second, this place possesses a great deal of harmony that must prevail and be protected, correct? I simply nodded. Super easy. Third, you are part of the Ikebana club. I nodded furiously. Another super easy thing. And lastly, any work outside the Gate 13 must be done in complete secrecy. We do not wish to tarnish our honor through your actions. It was then that all the color drained from my body as if I were being dragged back into Hueco Mundo. How does he know that? I yelled, completely terrified and embarrassed. After returning to the Sarate, I started back to work. It had been a few weeks since then, and I was going to work almost every 3 days. Moreover, the money I earn is even more than before. Perhaps because I'm even more attractive. Or because I've become better than before. I'm sorry. Was the echoing shout he heard outside, catching his and the lieutenant's attention. They approached a window to see Hinata running out of the barracks at great speed. You, I whispered, a surge of fury evident despite my forced smile. I was about to throw my zanpakudo at her for revealing something so important, but then I noticed her captain's gaze on him. Sighing, I returned to my seat. I'm sorry, Anahana Taicho, but the money is for a good cause, and working as a Shinigami isn't as lucrative as one might think, I tried to explain, only to elicit a soft chuckle from her. Are you planning to reopen your orphanage? I nodded slowly. Well, if so, then you can continue, but in complete silence. I nodded again. No one would find out about this, and if someone did, they'd take it to their grave like Hinata, for example. And don't make any jokes about Hinata-san. I just made a face of disgust. So many things I could do to get revenge. But changing the subject a bit, don't you feel a little ashamed tempting defenseless women like that? I don't think it's a viable job. I just blushed at her scolding and lowered my head slightly. The lieutenant, on the other hand, was blinking in confusion, completely bewildered, not understanding a thing, not even why my captain was mocking me. That's how the day ended, leaving me utterly humiliated, but I had finally achieved my goal. To be part of the 4th Division and to make Hinata pay, who was found half buried in the ground the next day. Exactly 9 years have passed, and still nothing has happened. Old Yamamoto, of course, was furious, as were the others. I tried to get some information during my absence, but I couldn't find anything, and no one would say a word to me about it. My friendship with Hinata continued. You could say he became my best Shinigami friend, which was progress for me. I managed to reopen the orphanage with all the money and made it bigger. My work brought the children back, and the orphanage was up and running again. I'm still practicing my healing Kido skills. It was much harder than I had imagined. My greatest achievement was learning the name of my zanpakudo. Although I haven't even released it yet, I know how to do it. I also met the spirit of my zanpakudo, but I'll leave that for later. I don't want to talk about that stupid fox. And that brings me to the present day, here waiting to see if something would actually happen. I sighed, knowing perfectly well that nothing was going to happen. Who would dare to directly attack the Sarate? Perhaps the Hollows or the Quincy, but the former lack the means, and the latter are extinct. My attention was literally snapped out of my hand when I heard the alarm blare, the walls crumble, and the Sarate revert to its impenetrable state. I realized then that things were about to get better, because while that doesn't mean anything, someone is trying to force their way in. And they said that being a doctor wasn't interesting. Wondering. Chapter 4. Soul Society Saga I. Wondering. Naruto stared at the walls with great curiosity. It was rare to see them raised, for although they were the Sarate's ultimate security, they were only used in cases of utmost importance. Remember, those walls were built to protect the Sarate from any invasion and to safeguard the Soul King should anyone dare to force their way in. He could barely sense any danger from the outside, and he could hardly even hear the invasion, so it must have been something else entirely. Wow, I wonder why Central 46 ordered this. Very strange, Naruto wondered, trying to use his brain. Central 46 was perhaps the group with the oldest old fogies in the Sarate, ignoring, of course, Captain Commander Yamamoto. They were practically the ones in charge of the entire Sirte, above the Gate 13 and the other military groups. But what characterized these old folks most was their tendency to mess everything they touched up. They turned every important matter into a problem, and the problem into a disease. It was common to see these old folks acting with a lot of paranoia, only concerned with saving their own skin, rather than protecting the Sirte as a whole. Naruto then watched curiously as a hellish butterfly flew towards him, landing in his hands before flying away. Meeting? Seriously? It's not like it's that big of a deal, he exclaimed, completely incredulous. They had called a meeting of captains and lieutenants for some other strange reason. With every step they took, everything became stranger and stranger. The meeting's still tomorrow, great day to take some time off, he said as he lay down in the grassy area where he was. Suddenly, his Zanpakuto began to tremble and resonate, drawing his attention. Don't bother me now, Fox, I don't have time for your complaints. I told you to stay there, and I don't intend to use you, the blonde finished, ignoring his sword, which continued to resonate and annoy him. I don't think you should treat your Zanpakuto like that, he heard a voice behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. His squad lieutenant, Isen Katetsu. Despite their initial interactions, they had a virtually non-existent relationship. For both their sakes and due to their captain's threats, they began to get along better, not completely, but enough for him to approach her without fear. I was going to give it a chance, but after last time I'm looking for a good place to leave it forgotten, he said, somewhat annoyed as he tried again to ignore his Zanpakuto, failing miserably. Do you think the dang guy will devour it if I leave it there? He asked doubtfully, his weapon almost moving on its own, seeming very annoyed by this, making the girl laugh at this. I don't think so, Naruto-senpai, the girl laughed while trying to hide it behind her hands. But it wasn't so bad, I think it was a very cute skill, she said, searching for the right words, ending up laughing, causing the blonde boy to have a slightly angry look. Very funny, I can't believe you even took me to the Shinigami Women's Association, he said angrily as he turned his back on her, remembering that fateful day when he was caged in her meeting room. I thought it would be a good idea, Isen admitted, somewhat embarrassed. That day, seeing that they were in a big problem because they had no idea what to do, she thought her companions would have some solution, but the problem only got worse when they were imprisoned in that terrible place. It doesn't matter, said the blonde man as he stood up and looked at the walls again. I was informed that you have a meeting tomorrow, as does the captain. Isen nodded, somewhat worried. Do you know what it's about? She asked, curious to know what had happened. I don't know for sure, there are still rumors. It seems that Ryokas have tried to enter the Sirte and have raised a protective wall. After hearing this, Naruto lay back down, thinking about her words. Just because of Ryokas? Something of that magnitude should be nothing more than a minor annoyance. Thinking this, she just sighed and decided to leave it for later. Alright, I don't know what's going on, but we should head back to headquarters. There might be more information from our captain. With that, he disappeared, surprising Isen. She just sighed and started walking. It would take her a while, but she wasn't as desperate as the blonde boy. Wondering. So is this how it's done? Naruto asked, arranging some flowers with a hint of curiosity. He'd been doing this for quite some time, ever since the first day he joined the 4th division, but at each meeting there was something new he was taught, or he'd forgotten things and had to refresh his memory. Uzumaki-san does it perfectly, said her captain with a smile as she sipped some tea. They were doing some ikebana even though it wasn't club day yet, but it helped them relax and manage their stress. The 4th division had a demonstration every week, and today was that week, so she was in front of the entire division attempting a difficult feat. Hey, I think I'm done, said the blonde man, wiping some sweat from his forehead. Practicing healing Kido was easier than arranging flowers. The entire squad applauded lightly at the demonstration, though most still wore incredulous expressions, seeing the legendary Shinigami doing this on a weekly basis. He was supposedly very violent, very powerful, and very proud, qualities he wasn't displaying at all now. Excellent, now it's your turn, Isen, the captain said with a smile, making her lieutenant nod. Naruto, on the other hand, was only looking at his plants with a certain interest. For some reason, he could occasionally see green dots or fireflies. It happened rarely when he and the lieutenant accompanied their captain in search of healing herbs or flowers for this sort of thing. In the Rukongai Mountains, there was an abundance of vegetation for a world that was otherwise dead. He sometimes had minor problems, seeing tiny green dots floating in the void. The moment he blinked, they were gone. He initially dismissed it as his imagination. But it happened more and more frequently, which alarmed him greatly, for then it ceased to be his imagination and became real. Is something wrong, Uzumaki-san? The captain asked, pulling him from his reverie. He shook his head as he watched Isen's presentation. Even knowing it might mean something important, he couldn't bring himself to worry. Shaking his head, he decided to leave it for later, ignoring his captain's steady gaze, who had noticed his last few glimmers of concentration. Wondering. What a great day for an invasion, Naruto said, lying back in his little spot, gazing at the sky. It was relaxing once you got used to watching the clouds for hours. And they could come in at any moment. He waited for any sign that they were coming, but nothing happened. Yep, any moment. He'd been waiting for some sign for quite some time. He'd gotten up very early to await the Ryoka invasion. He wasn't sure how many there were, since the wall prevented detection and interfered with everything he tried. The captains and lieutenants had already gone to their respective meetings, though he doubted any of the lieutenants would arrive on time. They were usually the ones with the most work when the captains weren't there. He supposed the Ryoka had no way of raising the gates of the wall. The field also protected the underground part of the Sirte. They only had one option left, and that was by air. I wonder what the invasion signal is. That question had been on his mind for a long time. What was that signal? Did they have one? They must have one. After all, the Sirte had survived several invasions in the past. He would know if he didn't skip the drills they routinely conducted. They were so boring that he preferred not to participate and would just fall asleep at home. Dawn was breaking, heralding the start of a new day, and there were still no signs of anything amiss. Suddenly, a tremendous explosion echoed in the distance. Curious, he got up to see a huge sphere hurtling toward the Sirte, specifically toward the protective field. Then his ears caught what sounded like a hammer striking a wooden board. Ah, so that was the signal, he said to himself as he listened to the Tentakura, divine chariots in the silky air, announce that this was not a drill and that they were on red alert. He watched as the sphere hurtled along, its trajectory somewhat erratic, until it struck the shield. He was genuinely surprised that it hadn't shattered upon impact, but the most incredible thing of all was when it managed to pass right through it. With a couple of shunpo, I managed to reach where they were all gathered, and before I could even see one of them, a yellowish light enveloped them in a small explosion, splitting into 4 groups that went in different directions. I could sense one group possessing an enormous amount of spiritual energy. It was a Shinigami accompanied by another that had a similar, but infinitely smaller, energy signature. I didn't know what to make of the next 2 groups. 2 of them had spiritual powers, but they were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and I could sense that the other one had Reishi surrounding him, a Quincy, perhaps. It doesn't matter, the time has finally come. Before he could make any move, he remembered that he should be at his headquarters because they were surely going to have a meeting to decide what to do. Well, the positive thing is that it'll give them time to think about it for a moment. With that, he started taking long strides using Shunpo. It was really a game for him to circle the Sirte just walking. It took him a while. He didn't really want to get to his division, so he wandered aimlessly around when he sensed those Ryoka fighting a Shinigami again. Curious that it was them, since he hadn't been able to identify them, he approached to see who they were, only to discover they were 2 teenagers. A pretty girl and an intellectual. He also noticed they were fighting a guy he hadn't even seen before. He didn't recognize many faces in the Gate 13 beyond a few important ones, so he wasn't sure which squad he was from. His fight was truly tedious, almost pointless. He had nothing but his Zanpakuto and his meager physical strength. Sighing, he knew he couldn't stay any longer. He did, however, offer a small assistance, as before the girl could be struck by one of his flying blades, he threw a small rock, successfully deflecting it and unknowingly saving her life. I arrived at my division's headquarters, but for some reason it was completely empty. Was I late? It wouldn't be the first time. My captain wasn't there, so she was still in the briefing room. It made perfect sense, since that meeting wasn't over yet. After a while, I started hearing groups arriving with many wounded. I raised an eyebrow. They all seemed to have fallen with a single blow. Had the Shinigami sunk so low? Sighing, I prepared to help in any way I could. It was my duty, after all. Soon he saw Yusachika Amura, the division's 3rd officer, appear. He was also the one who took his job the most seriously. He seemed very worried. "Hey, what's wrong?" Naruto asked the 3rd officer, who had finally noticed him, just like everyone else. "It appears they have defeated Ikaku Madara and 3rd officer Yumichike Asagawa. Ikaku's condition is the worst at the moment. He must receive immediate treatment," he said, while at that very moment, behind him, the injured Shinigami could be seen being transported to the general emergency station. Naruto sighed, seeing that neither his captain nor Isane was there. Now he had the duty to heal him. "Alright, we're both in charge for the moment. You handle the first aid equipment and I'll take care of the general emergency station." Yusachika nodded and then began to mobilize everyone. Meanwhile, Naruto began walking through the entire barracks and finally reached Ikaku. He was surrounded by nurses cleaning and trying to stop the bleeding in his chest. When they sensed his presence, they stepped aside, knowing that he would take over from now on. "You all try to help the other wounded, I'll take care of this one." They nodded and left the room. The blond man grew serious as he closed his eyes and created a kind of orange box, which slowly began to close the wounds. His current level of medical keto was below his captain's, but above his lieutenant's. Something he had kept to himself was the ability to rewind time slightly, only able to restore the wounds. The problem with this ability was that it completely paralyzed him. He couldn't move or lose focus while using it. Once he finished, he watched as Ikaku slowly woke up. He knew he had done his job. He was about to leave when he saw someone very familiar to him. Captain Mayuri and his lieutenant, Nemu. I believe I mentioned that no visitors are allowed until the patient is fully recovered, Naruto said, pointing to the door and indicating that they should leave, something the captain did not appreciate at all. Don't speak to me like that, Uzumaki. Remember your position. With that, the captain tried to force his way in, but the blonde man blocked him with his sheathed katana. Mayuri merely frowned before touching the weapon, trying to draw it from a distance, which he apparently couldn't do. I think I need to remind you of your rank, the captain said as he gripped his own weapon, not impressing his opponent much. I think you don't understand, patients shouldn't be disturbed. As he said this, he drew his katana, which vibrated every time the blonde man approached the hilt, and showed it to the captain. When they're recovering. With that, the katana was now out of control, almost reacting to his words. I never imagined you'd be the first to see my katana drawn. I always thought it would be Yamamoto, the blonde man admitted, slowly beginning to reveal the blade. The spiritual pressure in the place increased considerably, almost making the entire building tremble. Mayuri groaned as he watched the power continue to increase uncontrollably and without apparent end. Naruto, on the other hand, gave a small smile. My Zanpakuto craves blood that and to finally be released. Do you want to see it? The blonde man asked, watching as his lieutenant knelt, practically drowning in all the pressure he was releasing. Mayuri, completely annoyed and overwhelmed, knows he can't handle something like this. Seconds later, he turns his back on her and leaves. Come on, Nemu, we don't need that useless guy, he says. With that, the girl gets up again, feeling dizzy, and tries to follow her captain. Seeing that they had both left, Naruto sighs and resheathes his blade, putting it back in his belt. The katana continued to resonate and now seemed even annoying, causing the blonde to hide his face with his hand. Here we go again, I just wanted to scare him, you didn't have to believe it. With this said, the katana stopped resonating and only trembled slightly, making its owner's headache worse. With that, he left the room, seeing everyone practically running around. In just a few minutes, the entire barracks were packed, making Naruto feel sick from the sheer volume of work. I miss my captain, he muttered as he watched the nurses approach him, asking for help with one case after another. Just another day at work in the 4th division. Wondering. Phew, it's done, Naruto sighed as he finished healing the last idiot who twisted his arm when he fell from the blow he'd received. Truthfully, he'd never seen soldiers so easy to defeat. One punch was enough to take them all down. They seemed made of glass. The barracks were now more or less balanced since they'd voted out all those who weren't seriously injured and replaced them with those who had suffered some kind of serious wound. The nurses were taking some time for themselves. They'd been given time to rest. Besides, it wasn't like they had any major problems. After all, Squad 4 wasn't fighting. Naruto-sama, he heard behind him, seeing a seated Shinigami who looked very serious. It has been reported that Lieutenant Abarai is gravely injured. He fought one of the Ryoka, and it defeated him. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Defeating a lieutenant was more than incredible for mere Ryoka. It must be that Shinigami he sensed earlier. Where is he? If he's seriously injured, he should be in the emergency room, Naruto said as he looked at the Shinigami, who appeared to be from the 6th division. He is currently in custody. The captain has stripped him of his position and intends to imprison him for being defeated by the Ryoka. He believes he has brought dishonor to his squad. Naruto grumbled when he heard that. That was the most negative thing about Shinigami. Everything was aligned with honor this and honor that, as if they were still in such a backward era. Before he could say anything, another Shinigami came, this one from his squad. He looked very alarmed and very tired. Sir. Martial law has been declared. This time Naruto's face was in shock, as was the Shinigami from the 6th division who ran away. What? He shouted in disbelief. Martial law was the signal for war that granted full power to the military and the Gate 13, allowing them to use lethal force against any intruder. This was announced by the captain commander of the Gate 13 after being announced by the Central 46. Furthermore, this only occurred during times of war and full-scale invasion of the Sirte. For it to be declared now by just a small group of Ryoka was utter madness. I see you've been doing well during my absence, Uzumaki-san, he heard from behind the door. The officer simply looked surprised as his captain suddenly arrived and calmly opened the door. Naruto, on the other hand, huffed and started to leave. I'm not finished yet, Uzumaki-san, he sighed, turning back to his captain. I think you've already realized we're at war. Do you think this is the right thing to do? His captain asked, his eyes widening slightly. Naruto stared at his captain without any expression. Why are you asking me? You've been here longer than me. With that said, he started to leave, ignoring his captain's smile. Ah, but I didn't search Central 46. At this, the blond man's eyes widened just as he passed by his captain. Turning his gaze, he saw that she had a smile that was almost pure evil. You know there could be a very severe punishment for this, right? She asked again, to which he simply shrugged. I was curious, no one saw me, no one heard me, nothing happened. At this, his captain let out a small laugh. Besides, I didn't steal anything, I just had a look around, let's just say I borrowed their database. On the other hand, that happened a long time ago. The blond man started to leave the room, disappearing into the corridors. The Mashiroi, interesting, was all the captain said as she watched her officer leave the room, completely unconcerned. Wondering. Another new day dawned and Naruto stretched his arms, getting up completely. The previous day had been hectic, being in charge. It had truly been a challenge. His captain had given him special permission to separate from the group and watch over the Sirte, in other words, he had the day off. He was tracking the signs of spiritual energy, at least the strongest one. He was running at a moderate speed to be sure of where he was going, because although he was very good at detecting energy, the resulting energy was quite small. Then he finally lost him. It seemed to have vanished into thin air. Thinking for a moment, he tried to understand his enemy's objectives. Somehow, they just arrived, started fighting the officers, and then disappeared. All the signs pointed to a single place. Raising his gaze slightly, he caught sight of the highest peak in the entire Sirte, the Senzakik Palace of Penitence, a place for inmates deemed extremely dangerous by even the Chamber of 46. Is their goal to free someone very dangerous? Naruto wondered. It made perfect sense, and they were also very desperate, but it seemed to be working so far. Without wasting any time, he used all his speed to get to the location as quickly as possible. Standing at the doors or stairs, for that matter, I looked around for someone and finally found them. Approaching, I saw a very strange Shinigami coming towards me, another guy wearing odd clothes and carrying what looked like his Zanpakuto or a regular dagger, and Hinata. Naruto recognized, looking at his friend standing next to those who were supposed to be his enemies. The description given by Ikaku matched those two perfectly, but his friend being among them was a complete mystery. Hinata, upon seeing the blond man, only took a couple of steps back and tried to run away as fast as he could, but Ganju held him back, preventing his escape. Ichigo was equally confused by his companion's reaction. Why did he act that way? What's wrong, Hinata? Do you know him? Ichigo asked the completely desperate boy, who nodded with all his strength and was almost starting to cry from fear. Let me see if I understand, you've become a traitor. Naruto asked, noticing the Ryoka's apparent camaraderie. Do you know how bad the situation is because of them? And yet you're still helping them? The question only made the little Shinigami, who seemed to have already died, tremble even more. We have to run. The boy cried, completely terrified. He's not someone we should fight. Not him. His desperate cry astonished his companions, who stared at them both in disbelief. At least let me speak. The two Ryokas just looked at each other, confused, and nodded. Uzumaki-san. Don't hurt us. We have good intentions. The frightened boy cried, raising the blond boy's eyebrow. Is invading the Soul Society, infiltrating the Sirte, and starting to subdue the Gate 13, while damaging a gravity lieutenant in the process, all well-intentioned? I asked sarcastically, making everyone blink. When you put it like that, no, the truth is, no, Hinata said, scratching his cheek with a silly expression. He ended up earning a couple of punches from his classmates. Listen. Do you remember that girl I told you about last time? He shouted from afar to Naruto, who closed his eyes trying to understand what he had said. The Kichiki girl. I remember her, but what does she have to do with all this? He asked, confused. The last he'd heard of her was that she'd been sent to her squad's prison for disobeying orders, nothing serious. Her name is Rukia, you bastard. Ichigo yelled, drawing Naruto's attention. And she's been sentenced to death by your stupid group. He shouted again, furious, glaring at him. Naruto, on the other hand, seemed genuinely shocked. To death. Rukia-san has been sentenced to be executed at the Sankyoku. Naruto was equally shocked by the news. She's a really good person. She hasn't done anything wrong, and that's why we want to save her. She doesn't deserve something like this. It's unfair. Hinata shouted, breathing heavily. It really took a lot of effort from him to even express what he was thinking in front of someone who in a few seconds could be his last adversary. Naruto couldn't believe such madness. The Sankyoku. Were they crazy? Now they had truly crossed the line. He had only seen that device in action once, and that was a rare opportunity to end the life of a captain-level rogue. According to the records, it was the maximum sentence that could be carried out by the Central 46. Even the old guard was reluctant to summon such a weapon, as it required immense effort to control, and any mistake could cause massive damage. Now he could understand everything. Those giving the orders weren't the old men, it wasn't the Chamber of 46. They might be paranoid, but they knew what to do and what not to do. No one but them knew how dangerous this was and who it should be used against. Conclusion. Someone was impersonating the most powerful institution in the Sirte. I really didn't think someone as cowardly, fearful, timid and weak as you would dare betray the Gate 13. It seems you've finally grown up a bit, he smiled slightly at his friend. You're risking your neck alongside those two guys for the sake of a friend. If she's such a good person, then she might help you a little. The trio's eyes widened at this last part. They couldn't believe such madness. Seriously? Ichigo shouted incredulously. You'll betray your comrades for Rukia too. The substitute Shinigami couldn't believe that someone would suddenly join them just because someone was in danger. It was more dangerous for the rebels than for the invaders. Well, if Hinata claims to be a good person, he'd be a complete idiot to let her go to her death. What kind of hero would he be? He smiled, pointing at himself. Besides technically, my captain gave me the day off so technically speaking, I'm not a Shinigami right now, so helping them wouldn't be treason, he explained, shrugging, not caring how ridiculous he sounded. My friend's friend is my friend, Ganju whispered to Ichigo, who stared at him strangely. What? It's a very popular saying, Ichigo, Ganju tried to explain, prompting Hinata to support him. I thought the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Ichigo tried to correct himself while the others shook their heads. You clowns. I remember it being like that. He shouted angrily at being taken for a fool. Forget it. Let's keep running. With that, the group started running and went up the stairs. By the way, I don't know your name, this brought everyone's attention, who were looking at the blonde boy who was also going up with them. His name is Uzumaki Naruto, 5th officer of Squad 4, Hinata introduced, ignoring the dangerous looks on the other two comrades' faces. What's going on? He asked, confused. From Squad 4. You're talking about your useless squad. Ganju shouted, seeing that they had accepted another potentially inept squad for a battle. You know I can still hear you, right? Naruto stared intently at his new teammates, who swallowed hard at his sight. My squad might be useless in battle and many other things, but it's quite useful besides healing, Naruto assured them. All eyes turned to him, waiting for something more. I'd say what they are, but I have no idea. This last statement made his teammates, who were still lamenting, fall apart. No, Hinata denied. He's not like us. The only reason Uzumaki-san joined was because he didn't want to fight for the Gate 13. This last statement caught the Ryoka's attention. He's a legend among the Shinigami because he was the only one to be in Hueco Mundo and come out alive, he said, surprising Ganju but not Ichigo, who seemed completely lost. Hinata, stop giving away important information, followed by the blonde boy angrily hitting the small guy who started whining. On the other hand, who are you? He asked his new companions. I'm Kurosaki Ichigo, a substitute Shinigami, the orange-haired man introduced himself. The annoying one here is named Ganju Shiba. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the latter. His name tickled his head and it really bothered him not to remember. Shiba? Ganju Shiba? Are you some kind of relative of Kukaku Shiba? He asked, very curious. Seeing the surprised expression on his face only confirmed his suspicions. So you know her? How is she? He asked happily. Wait, don't tell me she was the one who sent you here with her cannon. Classic Kukaku. Everyone seemed quite impressed by the amount of information he had. Wait a minute, you know my sister? The latter asked, very confused. Naruto just nodded with a smile. He met her a couple of days after reopening his orphanage. She was the one who gave him his third job that month and she usually gets him more jobs around Rukongai. If you had told me you were from her, I would have helped you a long time ago, Naruto reported. In fact, you wouldn't have had to be shot by the cannon. I would have opened the door for you. Ichigo just facepalmed at this last bit. So much suffering from training and preparations for that stupid cannon when they could have just called this new guy and gotten through easily. When we get back, remind me to yell at my sister, Ganju whispered to Ichigo, who nodded. After this conversation ended, the group continued climbing until they reached the very top. They walked for quite some time and saw absolutely nothing but buildings. There doesn't seem to be anyone here, we should keep moving before someone finds us, Ichigo said to the others who nodded, but suddenly an enormous spiritual pressure began to be felt from all sides, a horrible spiritual pressure that began to flood the entire place, consuming every bit of shadow, drowning them in the process. They were all completely trapped by that pressure, which constantly increased and forced them to collapse little by little. What are you doing? Get up. Naruto said, walking as if nothing was wrong despite the pressure. Despite his words, they continued to struggle, and in Hinata's case, he was on the verge of fainting. Oh well, what can you do? With that, he turned his back on the group and extended his arms. I will place my own spiritual pressure as a spiritual field. But that, an enormous spiritual pressure began to emanate from the blonde, but instead of suffocating his companions, it created a field that seemed to counteract the other energy, completely negating it. That's very surprising, admitted Ichigo, observing how perfectly fine they were now. Naruto was acting normally, barely even trying to maintain the field. This was very easy compared to his Ikebana classes. Well, look who we have here, a voice called from between the buildings. Everyone tried to find some sign, but Naruto was looking straight ahead, where his enemy appeared in a burst of speed. 2 traitors and 2 Ryoka, he said, letting out a small laugh that startled Hinata, who recognized him. Kenpachi Zaraki, Naruto recognized, staring intently at the captain of the 11th division, the one who only thought about fighting. Meanwhile, Ichigo was having flashbacks of his fight with Ikaku, where Ikaku had mentioned his captain. So that's how things are, huh? I came here for a proper fight with the Ryoka, but I discover that Uzumaki Naruto is on their side too. What a pleasant surprise. He laughed macabrely as he stared intently at the blonde. Do you know how much I've wanted to fight you? You're just like me. The only thing that matters to us is the thirst for battle, craving the blood of our enemies. Naruto growled slightly as he increased his pressure. Now instead of a shield, he created a massive wall capable of overcoming Captain Zaraki's. Simply incredible, the captain laughed at the power of his adversary. But unfortunately, your captain will be saddened if he finds out that I've harmed his favorite officer. For now, I'll amuse myself with the Ryoka, so step aside. Ichigo, you don't worry, I know I can't escape. I'm going to fight him. You guys run and rescue Rukia. Ichigo interrupted him and stared intently at his new adversary. Naruto just sighed as he slapped his face. Idiot, you don't know how strong he is. You're still protected by my own spiritual pressure, the blonde reminded his friend, who blinked a couple of times upon realizing he was still inside that field. Smiling, he jumped out, leaving his friend frozen and suffocated by Zaraki's spiritual pressure. Is he an idiot or what? Naruto asked, seeing that he had launched himself into the fight without even knowing the true power of his opponent. What enthusiasm. That's what I want to make this Ichigo fight more entertaining, Kenpachi said, laughing as he watched Ryoka stumble under his pressure. I'll let you start our battle with an advantage. You'll strike first. With that, he tore open part of his clothing, exposing his chest. Ichigo's eyes widened as he realized Kenpachi was completely underestimating him. This made him reconsider, and it only fueled his fury. Ichigo, wait. He ignored her and ran straight towards Kenpachi, Zanpakuto in hand. He lifted him up and prepared to attack with all his might. The blow landed with a loud clang, but to everyone's eyes, only Ichigo's hands were bleeding, while the sword hadn't even scratched Kenpachi. You may be strong, Ichigo Kurosaki, but not strong enough. He shouted, almost ecstatic at what he had seen. Kenpachi then gripped his sword and made Ichigo jump away from him. A dull blade is a product of the low spiritual pressure you generate, which doesn't surpass or even resemble mine. It's being overshadowed, and that's why your sword was rejected. With this power, you won't even be able to scratch me. At this, Ichigo's eyes widened in shock, unable to believe he was facing someone so incredibly strong. What a disappointment. I spent so long searching for someone worthy like you, and it turns out to be someone so weak. Even as a joke, it's not funny. Kenpachi's hand gripped the hilt of his Zanpakuto and raised it above him. Now it's my turn, Kurosaki Ichigo. Live long enough to feel the iron of this thing. Don't let me down, Ryoka. With a smile on his face, he prepared to attack Ichigo, who also seemed very determined to face him. Suddenly, as if time had stopped, Naruto appeared in a shunpo next to Kenpachi and then vanished. Zaraki still had his smile, which had even widened when he stood still. Ichigo, on the other hand, was frozen, having seen nothing but a black blur that lasted only a blink of an eye. I've never used my Zanpakuto before, not even as a weapon, Naruto said, his katana drawn, not a trace of blood on it. He stood far behind Kenpachi, his back to him, his 2 companions below him. I never thought I'd use it against you, Kenpachi Zaraki. Honestly, I wanted to use it against old Yamamoto. Well, I guess I have no choice but to show him my Shikai. With that, the blonde boy began walking lightly as he finished igniting his weapon, sheathing it to reach his 2 companions and restrain them. Win Kurosaki Ichigo. With that, he vanished, and as he did, a gaping wound opened across his chest, leaving not only Ichigo, but also his lieutenant, who watched as his captain was brutally slashed across the chest, completely shocked. Zaraki, on the other hand, simply laughed as he touched the wound and surveyed the spilled blood. No deep damage. He didn't even cut a nerve point to weaken me during the fight. He really is a killing machine, Zaraki cackled almost insanely. How interesting, Kurosaki Ichigo. Very, very interesting. He continued laughing, making the named man stand on his guard. Let's fight. This battle has only just begun. Wondering? Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown in left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.